Thank you for being here. I'm really, really privileged and honored that you're here. And I will, first and foremost, I think, introduce Mary, just say a few words myself and then hand over to her because Mary is going to be doing the real talking today, not me. Now, when I was looking at Mary's CV, it occurred to me that she must have started her career when she was 11 because she's done so much. So she's a stylist, a writer, a creative director, and former Vogue editor. She's worked for 11 Vogues, including launching the one in Turkey. She's dressed real women for Anna Wintour for 15 years in the United States. She's been a former editor at The Economist. She has dressed a host of A-list household names for the Oscars, including Julianne Moore, Olivia Colman, all sorts of names which, I mean, literally, I could name drop till tomorrow. And now she's, her passion is sustainability. And she's a sustainability consultant for fashion and luxury. And of course, she's going to tell you a bit more about that later herself. For me, just to tell you very quickly about the journey with this book, in a sense, it's not brand new because we've had 2 years of pandemic. But in this brief period of time, we have had a wonderful, I was very humbled to see what a wonderful reception the book received. And 12 launches later, here we are today. And it's a little bit surreal, actually, to be doing this in real life. The reason why the book was written was because over the 15 years I was at Sotheby's, as you can imagine, I was exposed to art from morning to evening. And in the Middle East, I saw this kind of transition a little bit from calligraphy to geometric abstraction. Now, again, I'm going to speak in generalizations because I'm going to simplify things and speak quickly. So it's not that sort of hard and fast, but I just saw this general trend. So I got sort of excited about it and started doing research and realized that actually a lot of it goes back to the idea of getting inspiration from Islamic art and architecture, but it's not as simple as that. There's also a lot of influence of Islamic art and architecture in Western art. So then that got me thinking about the dialogue between the East and the West. And I have to say, this book is only an introduction. It's a really rich subject, and I hope somebody will write a definitive volume on it. But for the purposes of our discussion, this was just an introduction. So what was the key takeaway? What is the key takeaway, rather, from this book? It's really just 1 or 2 points about the differences between the way Middle Eastern art, relying on Islamic tradition, so to speak, deals with geometry, as opposed to the way Western art and the Western perception deals with geometry. And I have to say, I'm speaking simplistically. It's not just, not entirely black and white. Both, artists refer to each other. But on the whole, we find that in Islamic tradition, in the Middle Eastern tradition, geometry is used as an end in itself. So that when you look at mosques, architecture, art, and so on, the embellishment, the patterns are the end in itself. Whereas in the Western tradition, geometry is a means to an end. And if you look at the history of Western art, the canon of art history, you'll see that geometry has actually, artists go and deconstruct and break the rules of geometry. So you have, for example, cubism and so on. But as I say, it's not hard and fast, because if you look at op art, or, I don't know, Victor Vasarely, for example, who uses geometry, they use geometry as an end in itself as well. But and this comes from a very basic kind of distinction. In the 15th century, Dürer perfected, and his followers perfected, something we call arithmetic progression. Whereas in Islam, the basis used for development of adornment is based on geometric progression. Now you're going to ask me, what is the difference between the two? And I'm going to be very quick and simplify it very easily. Arithmetic progression is if you think of, let's say, 2 cubes as a pattern. The next pattern that's going to be repeated will be +2. And the one after that will be another +2. So 2 cubes, then 4 cubes, then 6 cubes. And that's the way, in the Renaissance and so on, artists develop patterns. In Islamic art and architecture, the artists based themselves on geometric progression, which was the variant is based on a ratio, and the ratio is on a multiple. So you have 2 cubes, and then you have 4 cubes, but then it becomes 16 cubes, and it becomes 30. So it doesn't go, do you see what I'm saying? So it's a multiplication system. Why is this important? Because the actual geometric progression gives a lot more scope for complexity in patterns and constructions. And that's how you get the extraordinary monuments and architecture that you see in Islamic tradition. That's it in a nutshell from me. Now, how does this relate to fashion? And the lovely talk that I'm really looking forward to hearing from Mary, because I've heard a snippet of it. I'd love to see, in your perception as well, what part of what she's going to talk about would be geometry as an end or as a tool. So over to you, Mary.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much indeed, Roxanne, for that lovely introduction. And I'd like to echo her sentiments of gratitude towards the team here at Bista, who have been not only flawlessly efficient and precise, but also warm and human. So big shout out to them for being so kind. And thank you all for coming. So I was so interested when Roxanne approached me to be involved in this, because geometry and fashion, I think a lot of people think about geometry and they might immediately think of print, exotic print, and print that reminds you of Moroccan tiles or stripes and things. But actually, the potency of geometry and fashion is usually invisible. But we're going to address all 3 of these subjects. So print and surface is the obvious one. And since we're here to talk about art, I thought it'd be nice to look at the best example of geometry in fashion, which is Mondrian's dress, the Mondrian dress for Yves Saint Laurent. And that is literally wearable art. And I'm sure a lot of you here have got either Roger Vivier or similar shoes, but where would we be without a really fantastic buckle on our feet? And then Yayoi Kusama, another great example of geometry in art combining with fashion. Those are some of earlier things that she did. And then, of course, she did this wonderful, well-known collaboration with Louis Vuitton, which, again, is the power of art, not just geometry, but the power of art when it combines with fashion. And these pieces are highly collectible and enormous amounts of fun. And then I'm sure many of you here own Pucci or would love to. And it's a different way. It's what I call drunken geometry, because it's sort of a psychedelic, kaleidoscopic approach to taking geometry and abstracting it and letting it, a little bit loosey-goosey. And it's very, very powerful. And then looking again at art in fashion and geometry in fashion and how they all collide. I mean, again, where would we be in fashion today without the contribution of op art into fashion? These are 2 contemporary examples, and then of course we go back to Bridget Riley inspirations. And then op art, obviously at the same time that op art was going on, we had the geometric silhouettes that Courrèges and Pierre Cardin became very well known for, and which we'll come on to a little bit to later, but it's always worth remembering, if you're buying these sort of prints and stripes and checks, that you're also buying a slice of op art or wearing a slice of op art. So it's a nice way to think about those things rather than just they're a check or they're a stripe. It's like, what am I touching into here? Paco Rabanne, of course, made his chainmail dresses in the 60s and then onwards, and that's on the far right is actually also another example of Paco Rabanne, but that's another way that geometry can be extremely powerful in fashion. And of course, most of us can't wear these things, but there are still bags and there are still accessories that sort of echo that brilliance of how geometry can be put together it's sort of between jewellery and fashion as well. And here are some other favourites from more contemporary fashion. Pucci, when it's actually been less drunk and more cubist, to acknowledge Roxanne's point. And again, Pucci in the recent collection was a little bit drunk, but not as drunk as it used to be in the 70s. And then a slightly older version of Marni, which you can see pays direct homage to Paco Rabanne. And some more wearable versions of print. So this is sort of going back to Roxanne's very good point about geometry as an end in itself or as a means to something else. And most of these examples I'm showing you in this section are when geometry in fashion is more of an end in itself. It's the surface. It's the kind of, it stops there with what you see. And I mean, I'm sure lots of people here own some Dion von Furstenberg print dresses or shirts and other designers who do that sort of print. And it can be very powerful, especially when mixed. And I love what Prada do. They tend to layer up print. And you can, if you're feeling confident, especially when I think we all got a tan or in a more resort-like climate, yes, it can be extremely powerful. And here are some further examples of mishmash geometry. And there is a sort of almost cubist-like element to this as well, where it's kind of just layered up and added to. And I often think that it takes a lot of confidence to wear these kind of styles, but I also think sometimes you can hide behind them. And it's quite important to think of how print serves you as someone who wears clothes, because I often default to print if I'm feeling a bit shy or a bit, we have these days where we're self-conscious, and sometimes if you let your clothing do the talking, then you can slightly hide behind it. And you might think, oh, I don't know if I'm feeling confident enough to wear that today. Well, if you're not, that might be the reason you should put on something quite loud. The other interesting thing about geometry in fashion is what we call the invisible geometry, the architecture of pattern cutting. Most of you here are extremely sophisticated and probably have been to tailors over the course of your time of consuming fashion. But it's really interesting to think that fashion actually starts as geometry. Pattern cutting is literally lines, circles, ellipticals, triangles, squares, and such like. A sleeve, when it's unpicked, is literally just a triangle with a circle in it. And to know how pattern cutting and tailoring works can often work to your advantage. And so I would urge everybody here, the next time you take a trip to the tailor or the seamstress, is to sit and spend time looking at where they put lines and how they can use lines and use ellipticals and all these other forms that are basic from when we go back to age 4. And we have the triangle in our geometry set as children and the ruler. And those things are actually very much a part of every single piece of clothing you put on. And to think about how geometry serves you is really important, because it can really change the way your body looks. And I think most of us here, I'm sure, we all want to look our best and sometimes look our tallest and our leanest, depending. So it's there to serve you for that reason. And we're going back to the 60s that we touched on earlier. What I think is wonderful about these silhouettes from Courrèges is that he, thinking about geometry as either an end in itself or a means, well, here it becomes a means and an end, because what it does is it totally takes the eye away from the human inside it in a way, and the clothes become front and center. The clothing itself becomes this sort of standalone piece of, again, like armor. And there's something extremely liberating about that, because again, the drama that's created by having a very, very sharp silhouette, which is something that men tend to have on a more daily basis with the lines within their clothes. But for women, it's, I think, very liberating to be able to hide under something that has its own form. And I think some people get shy about wearing these kind of sharp, bold forms because they are more dramatic, and but they protect you and can be extremely powerful. And more of Pierre Cardin. I mean, not all of us can wear these kind of things, but actually, there's something about the Cardin and Courrèges silhouette, especially the top right, that short trapeze-shaped dress, whether it's above the knee or to the knee. On most women, I can't think of any woman I've ever dressed that didn't look good in that style. It doesn't matter how tall, short, top-heavy, pear-shaped. It doesn't matter what shape you are, what age you are. But it is always, I think, the sort of pinafore trapeze shape is one of the best default silhouettes that any of us can embrace. And just for a little bit of fun and lightheartedness, where would we be without the geometry of Jean-Paul Gaultier and Madonna? Yes. I don't think you'll find that much of this at Bicester, but just for a little lighthearted touch. And then going back to the idea of art and fashion, which is why we're here, thanks to Roxanne, is Hussein Chalayan, who created this extraordinary piece of, I mean, it's artwork, it's not really fashion, it's artwork masquerading as fashion. He actually was, when he was at Central St. Martin's, which is also my alma mater, his tutor said to him, you know what, you're wasting our time in the fashion school here. Leave, please, go to the art school. We're sick of you. We've had enough of your rubbish. And he went on to become one of the great designers. So it was things like this that gave him, at the time, a bad reputation. And another bit of whimsy for us just to entertain, really, is these designers, Victor and Rolf. I don't know if you're all familiar with Victor and Rolf. Now, of course, most of us are very rarely ever going to even consider wearing something like this. But distilled down into something more wearable, you can see how these girls have fantastic bodies, which most of us don't have. But when you deploy even a few of the rules that are inside these clothes, which is these incredible sharp forms and lines, they can, again, do the work for you so that you can step out and you're sort of, again, protected and the clothes are doing the talking and the lines are what serve you well. And depending on what sort of work or engagements anyone in this room goes to, I often urge people to think about these really strong linear silhouettes, because when you walk into a room or you've got to do public speaking or you put your best foot forward, having very good sharp, bold lines to the other onlooker can do wonders, because it gives a sense of presence and importance without you having to even deploy any of that yourself. So again, it's making fashion work for you. And a few more lighthearted moments of when the geometry of architecture and pattern cutting can be deployed to be extremely powerful. Again, most of us are not going to wear these things, but there are takeaways from within it. So a very long linear silhouette with very good tailoring, such as this one on the far left, is extremely powerful. The Gareth Pugh I've put in there just for fun because it's costume. And we're going to come back to shoulders later, but here are a couple of examples in the history of fashion where, I mean, geometry's been taken to an extreme, but it's fun. And then Shirin Gild is a designer that Roxanne has mentioned who's done a much more wearable approach to the things we've been talking about. But again, if you look at the power of those two outfits down there, is very much, again, down to geometry, an asymmetric skirt length, a boxy coat. And again, the same outfit here. And then as well, where would we be without Prada? I'm not sure how many people here are Prada fans, but that triangle, whenever you see that, you kind of know. For me, I feel like I'm going home. And then we're going to get to silhouette. Now, I thought we'd jump back a little bit into history here because all the other examples I've shown you have been recent and 20th century mainly. Now, hooped skirts and crinolines, what are they? They're a series of circles and squares, if you look in the middle. These paniers, they were called paniers, which is French for basket, which is also the name of those things that people put on bicycles. They're called panniers, so you can see the connection, right? And again, where would we be without these panniers? And they are based exactly on geometry, this sort of elliptical with a square underneath. And then on to Christian Dior now, you know, this incredible A-line full skirt that I'm sure many of you have worn versions of, came about really as a response to the austerity of the Second World War. And during the war, it was forbidden to use more than, I think it was 6 yards of fabric to make a skirt. And Christian Dior came under huge attack and applause at the same time when he put dozens and dozens of yards into fabric as a skirt. And then we end up with this famous 50s silhouette, which is famous for all of us. And then I thought I'd show the transition of when geometry and fashion in the 20th century really came about. So we had the Belle Epoque, and I think most of you have probably seen My Fair Lady with Audrey Hepburn. And that's a typical example of Belle Epoque fashion, lots of very curvilinear, fluid, organic forms. That gave way to the 1920s, which was a time of, as we know, huge liberation for women in terms of clothing and many other things, the suffragettes, etc. And suddenly you saw the advent of androgyny. And we think now about androgyny, we think about maybe Kate Moss in the 1990s and these sort of grungy girls and these straight, long black dresses. But actually androgyny started back in the 20s. And then it became okay to wear trousers. I mean, we all wear trousers, but can you imagine what it must have felt like for the first time that women could actually wear these trousers and step out and not have to think about how they get in and out of a car or God knows, you know. And these styles, to me, all look extremely modern today, and that's an idea of how geometry, the earliest geometry in the 20th century in fashion, has never gone out because of just the use of straight, long, vertical lines. And that's really what this is about. It's just and a few straight, horizontal in the middle. And then another classic for every woman to think about is the Saint Laurent's Le Smoking. Now, even if you don't buy it from Saint Laurent, every woman, I think, should own a tuxedo. And nearly every season, pretty much every brand, you'll find a good tuxedo to suit your shape. So if you don't have one, go look out there. There's probably some out there behind us. McQueen, again, I'm sure many of you own or love Alexander McQueen. There's a few examples of when he has deployed geometry to extremely potent effect. And it takes confidence to wear some of these things, but when you distill them right down, you can see how, again, playing with the body and playing with lines and how they intersect with the body can be quite fun because, again, it can take the attention off you. And you can, again, sort of hide amongst these bold forms and look your best. And then this example on the left, we're going to another form of geometry, is the shoulders. Now, I'm sure some of you might have worn those shoulders the first time round. I'm not going to ask any of your ages. But they're back. And this red coat here is a recent Marc Jacobs. Now, most of us probably aren't going to wear anything as extreme as that, but I think the return of the 80s shoulder in its more diluted and more wearable form in the last, say, 5 years or so has been a huge, huge positive aspect of contemporary fashion because I have a really strong belief about a strong shoulder on a woman. And we're going to come on to some of the women I've dressed and why I believe in that, but it's something to note. And then where would be that geometry on the red carpet as well, because that's fashion at its absolute best usually. And all three of these, for different reasons, if you look closely at them, have deployed geometry for drama and also to be extremely flattering. So Carey Mulligan's cape, again, is obviously cut out as just a great big square of fabric. And then the triangle of her body, which obviously is the skirt. And then Rihanna with all of that slightly broken geometry, which I thought was very, very beautiful and very, very flattering. And then Tilda Swinton is one of my all-time style icons, and she wears a lot of this designer, Belgian designer called Haider Ackermann. And he always uses long, long, lean, straight lines on her to the most incredible effect. So if anyone's ever stuck for style inspiration, look at Tilda Swinton wearing Haider Ackermann, because it's flawless. And we deserve the accessories deserve a mention. I actually own these beige ones here, and I can tell you they're actually very comfortable, and they always, they've become a talking point. What would that shoe without a wedge and a triangle would be nothing, but a little glass triangle is a lot of fun. And that's actually my first boss, Isabella Blow. You can't see her very well, but wearing the red disc around her face. And again, of course, most of us probably don't have that many occasions for that, but a circle on the head is always very, very powerful, but if any of you ever have to wear a hat that's a circle of some form around the face, I always say put your hair back, because those circles around the face never look good with loose hair. It's a little style note. Yeah. On to bags. I'm sure many of you here either love or own some Bottega Veneta. That's the more older version of it. Now they've got a new designer. He's been taking the classic Bottega weave and turned it on its head and played with it quite a lot, as the Cubists have done that Roxanne mentioned. And the new, it's called New Bottega, is worth looking into, because he does do some wonderful things. And again, geometry in hair. And the interesting thing about geometry in hair is that obviously hair is fluid and it's obviously organic, and we have all these very organic lines of our faces. So when you, like with the body, with geometry on the body and geometry around the face, you're cutting through the organic, you're cutting through the curvilinear forms, and it can be extremely dramatic and extremely powerful. I'm sure many of you remember Mary Quant and her famous bob. So all of these things are just another variation on that, because she really started it. But it's... There's a great potency in having a blunt cut. And I think a lot of women often have layering and softer things, which can look very good too. But bluntness is often, it takes courage, but actually, again, thinking about clothing as a form of protection and as something to hide behind, it can be very empowering as well. Some really good, sharp, straight lines. And Anna Wintour being the obvious one. And a few just amusing moments here of geometry in hair, which I thought might entertain and inspire potentially. Katy Perry, Naomi Campbell, and the singer Sia. And then makeup. Again, it's a very hard thing to carry off with geometry and makeup, and it's actually something I don't tend to encourage when it comes to real life or dressing actresses. But a cat eye, I think, is also really powerful, for the same reason that a sharp, blunt fringe or a good sharp line around the face of the hair can be quite powerful, as it is with the clothing. A really strong cat eye, again, can take a lot of attention away from other things in the face and becomes a focal point. So having those sort of accents, or like punctuation marks, can be very, very powerful, but I would not advise maybe going quite as far as this when you next go to a dinner party. And then the last and most exciting part of geometry and fashion is a girl's best friend, a diamond. And the interesting thing about diamonds is, if you think in nature, you don't see any straight lines in nature apart from the horizon of water and diamonds. And if I've missed something, I could be wrong, but maybe butterflies' wings or the odd thing like that. But on the whole, you don't ever see geometry as it is in its purest form in nature, but in diamonds you do, and that's the ultimate fashion accessory. And then how to deploy its hidden potency to enhance your style and look your best. I've mentioned a few tips already. One of the pieces of advice I give to people is to keep print away from the face. It can be very, very powerful, but if you're not feeling your best, I think it can be... It's hard to wear around the face, and it's something you have to really think about your makeup with, and that's, for example, I've done the red lip to go with the dress I'm wearing today. So if you do print around your face, think about how it sits with your hair, think about how it sits with your makeup, and think about what else you're putting it with, because it can be very, very powerful, but it can also be quite distracting. So I always say to people, don't wear it if you're going into a business environment or having your picture taken, because print on the body as well. If it's a print, it looks great on the hanger, but the minute most of us have a bit of a bust, it can break up the print, and it tends to lose its potency. So it's usually better worn on the lower half, in my opinion, but there's always exceptions to every rule. And pattern cutting, what to look for depending on our body shape. Now, I mentioned shoulders, and I think a lot of people are frightened of having a good sharp shoulder, but it really does absolute wonders. And what I do for all the actors I dress is I give them a custom-made, it's a beige t-shirt, which is low-necked, with an inbuilt shoulder pad that's immovable. And they put that under nearly every dress and every top and every jacket they wear. And it just means that the minute they put that on, every garment they put on hangs better. Especially the ones who've got a generous bust, because quite often a generous bust can sort of slightly overshadow the shoulder and the rest of the body. And by putting it just not a big shoulder pad, we're not talking 1980s, but one that has a sharp cut-off side here, not the rounded one here, but with the sharp edges here, is your best friend. And if you don't have shoulder pads like that, I urge you to try putting them in all your jackets, even sweaters, sweatshirts, tops, blouses, even just small, simple ones, but they do absolute wonders for the body and for the way the fabric hangs off it. And what else to look for? I think one of the things I get asked a lot about with the actors I dress is, oh, I feel self-conscious, I feel like my hips are too big, or I feel top-heavy, or my shoulders are... And one of the things that can work really well as a simple go-to trick is if you feel self-conscious about the shape of your hips or your bust or your shoulders, having a palazzo trouser, whether it's a full-length palazzo or a cropped palazzo, so that trapeze, again, we're going back to geometry, just a trapeze-shaped trouser, that extra few inches of volume around the ankle or the mid-calf always balances out the silhouette and the shoulder and the bust, so you literally end up as sort of like this shape, like that. And even though it adds volume on one level, it actually balances out volumes elsewhere. So it's a lot of people I think often think, well, I should wear really narrow, tight trousers because then I'll look thinner. And actually you don't. It can often, a narrow, tapered trouser makes you look bigger elsewhere on the body. So if having that sort of flattering thing is a goal, then go and buy masses of pairs of cropped or full-length palazzo trousers, or even slightly flared 1970s styles, because they really, really work wonders for the whole silhouette. And then, last but not least, how to use geometry's qualities to live your best style life and silhouette is really always, when you're shopping and trying things on or trying on outfits at home, is to think about silhouette, because it's the first thing you get taught at fashion school, where, as I mentioned, I went to Central St. Martin's, and the first thing they tell you is silhouette, silhouette, silhouette. So if you just sort of close your eyes and slightly blur and imagine if you just sort of coloured in or drew what the silhouette of your outfit looks like. If you think silhouette first, that's how you can then make fashion that you're wearing it's most flattering for you. Because if you're short, you don't want to have too big a shoulder, for example, and then a really small shoe. You might want to have a more sort of bolder, slightly chunkier style of shoe, so that balances out the shoulders. If you are top heavy, again, I said you might want to extend the volumes lower down, so either wider skirts or trapeze-shaped palazzo trousers. And the other thing, I think a lot of people think that if I pull in on the waist, then I'm going to look bigger up here. No, it's always about finding your narrowest part and the most flattering part. So if in doubt, always try and get a waist, because that just little bit of geometry, which is effectively two little half triangles, like that always does absolute wonders. And even if you think your waist is not what it should be, it doesn't matter. Adding in that little bit of definition in the waist is always a winner. And I thought the last thing we'd finish on was a case study of Olivia Colman, who I had the huge honour to dress for quite some years in the run-up and before and then after, when she won the Oscar for the movie The Favourite. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but she came to me saying, gosh, I've never really worked with a stylist, and I hate my figure, and I loathe fashion, and I just want to wear a smock all the time, and I just want to wear my husband's sweaters, and that's all I want. I was like, oh, yeah, you're going to be on the red carpet quite a lot. I think we might have to have a little think about this. So I'm just going to go to what happened without geometry. This is Olivia without geometry. And she's got a very generous bust and quite a short torso and great long legs. But you'll see here how, without the right sharp lines deployed for her silhouette and for her pattern cutting, compare these two with geometry. And it's the same woman, the same size as all those other pictures that I showed you before. Nothing has changed. She's not lost weight here, nothing else, but it's just the power of geometry. And there's some more. And for example, this outfit where she won the Golden Globe on the far left, the geometry there is literally just having a straight line across the shoulder to reveal the shoulder. I think women of every age, right up until their 90s, I mean, most women look great with their shoulder and their neck exposed. And the great thing about a cape or a cutaway sleeve like hers is, again, it's a very narrow triangle. But that's really flattering, because most of us, I don't know, get to a certain point where we don't particularly like our upper arms. But you can just choose, by using a triangle, how to reveal the best of your arm. And again, with that cape dress she wore, most of us don't have the occasion to wear a long cape dress like that on a weekly or monthly basis, but even a short version of a dress like that is extremely flattering because it covers you up from the back. So if you feel slightly self-conscious about what goes on back here, then you know a cape type dress is extremely useful. And again, even with a generous bust and everything, the V, a very, very sharp V like that in that second image there, works brilliantly, but you can see that I've added a shoulder pad there. And so that V and the rest of the outfit would not work without that sharp line across the shoulder. And then, let's go back one again. There, you can see this image here I love because we added a line across the body. And that, because she was very self-conscious about her bust, by adding an extra layer of fabric like that across it, it just took the eye right away from the bust. You didn't even see the bust, as we did for the Oscars. Because she was self-conscious, we just covered it. So again, it's just 2 straight lines, but the miracle it did, combined with using long lines around the neck, we made her tall and lean and took the attention off the bust. So those are all examples of when geometry works as opposed to when it doesn't. I hope that makes sense. And that's all. So thank you very much.
Bing. That was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wow, even just the comparison of Olivia Colman, I am kind of blown away by that. Do we have any questions for Mary and Roxanne today? Yes?
Thank you, Mary, for this inspiring presentation.
Thank you.
And I have a quick question. How do you take shapes into account when dressing women from different types of bodies?
Very good question. I think it falls into 2 things. It's first, what do I think of the way their body is made, and how do I bring out the best of it? And second of all, what is their taste? Because it's one thing for me to have my own vision of how someone should look, but you also have to work with someone's soul and their taste. And so I think it depends on what their goals are, because some people we've had an interesting thing around what's called the body positivity movement in recent years. And someone might say, you know what, I'm fine with the fact that I've got a really big bust, or I'm really curvaceous, and I've got a really generous hips or bum, and I want to own that and wear it. But you first have to look and think, well, what parts of your body do you love and what don't you love? And should they be, really celebrating that with clothing, or kind of making it a little bit more mysterious? And so you start with those different kind of questions, and then you then deploy some of the things I've mentioned, such as, just throwing in a really good shoulder. For example, having a cape sleeve can do wonders for the arms. Using a big or a narrow belt to help define the waist. Thinking about, a little slither of ankle under a trouser, just making a trouser more cropped can make it look really modern. So then what you're looking at is just a rectangle of ankle. So again, back to geometry, that's a rectangle. And the other thing I always say to the women I dress is, if you wear round toe shoes, be careful, because they foreshorten the leg in photographs or to the onlooker. So by using triangles, long pointed shoes, they take the eye all the way down further. It's like a game of perspective in a way. So I'm sure many women here have wonderful pointed shoes, but they are, in my opinion, usually the most flattering for elongating the leg. Using ankle straps can be a disaster on a lot of people. Again, a geometric horizontal line, because they can cut the leg off. And so I say, be careful with ankle straps unless you've got great ankles and great calves, or just wear them and be fine with it. I hope that answers the question.
I will definitely keep that in mind. Thank you so much. Next time I have to wear my snapbacks, I will think of you. Do we have any more questions? I actually have one before we get to the floor. Do you have a question? Amazing. I have a burning one, though. Okay, so this is for the both of you. If you had to pick, well, you have to pick because of the question. What's your favorite decade, era, or movement in fashion? And you have to pick one.
Oh,
it's tough, isn't it?
I can't. Okay. Probably, for the reasons I mentioned, probably the 60s. Because I think you just, no matter what occasion, what event, no matter what you're feeling like, the minute you have that courage cardin type silhouette, you know that you're not going to go wrong with it, and it's never going to go out of style, and it's never going to look dated. So I think, yes, probably I'd pick that.
I kind of knew you were going to say I kind of already knew. And Roxanne, what about
For
you?
me, it was the 80s because I don't know. For me, 80s is Joan Collins, power, the power shoulders, and somehow tied in with like female empowerment, that kind of thing. But I'm a real fashion ingenue when it comes. I mean, for me, this has been a masterclass, just sitting here completely tongue-tied, listening to Mary. So thank you for that, by the way.
All of us have very much been educated today. Tori, would you like the microphone?
I'll speak
Okay.
Thank you so much again. Quick question for Roxanne. I have just loved looking through your book this afternoon, and obviously it's geometry and art in modern Middle East. I'm really interested to know, do you also see this coming out in the States, in the UK, in Europe? Like, how do you see geometry and art manifesting itself in other parts of the world? And do you think that architects and designers are picking up cues from the Middle East in that terms of design and architecture? Well, thank you. Actually, that's why I said I wish someone would write a really major book on the topic, because there's so much to be said about that, and I won't take up everybody's time. But yes, there's definitely a dialogue. So if you look at some of these artists and their statement, they look at, for example, François Morellet in France and his kind of geometric work, and then architects, as you say. There's also an American, a young American called Philippe Taff, who uses Islamic geometry, and then vice versa. If you look at Matisse, for example, Matisse spent some time in North Africa, and a lot of his fabrics and backdrops are actually based on Islamic patterns. So there's a lot of conversation going on. And for that reason, yes, it's a wonderful dialogue. And it just goes to show that geometry really is, as Mary has been saying, at the basis of everything. We live with geometry in design, in furniture, in our clothes, the way we do our hair. It informs everything we do. So I hope that once you go out, you can just sort of pick out geometric patterns in everything that you see.
Any more questions?
Can I ask a question?
Yes. Shall
What
I?
is- It's okay, I'm loud enough. But trust me, I'm loud enough. I just wanted to ask you, what inspired you to get into fashion?
It started, it sounds a cliche, but it started literally at the age of 3. The dressing up box, making clothes for my dolls. And I think I was never really interested in owning too much fashion or buying into trends, but I was fascinated by the effect of fashion on our own psychology, and how fashion can tell everybody about who you are at that moment. And what's so interesting about it is if we step out in a t-shirt and a pair of jeans to go and do our grocery shopping, we become taken very differently by the onlooker to when we put on a ball gown. And fashion really is costume. Even everything we're wearing today, if someone was making a movie about this particular scene today, we'd all be in costumes, not fashion, right? And it's when you think as a costume designer, what each outfit says about the person that's wearing it and why they're wearing it in that particular scene, fashion has that same potency. So it's very much an indicator of who you want to be or who you are, or a bit of both. And I think it can be extremely powerful, fashion, in changing people's perception of you. And it's that fascinates me, about how it represents who you are in your mind or who you want to be, and also how people respond to you. And it's extremely powerful. So I think that was one of the reasons I was fascinated by its potency, and also by the craft of it, because I was always making things as a child with stones or paints or woodwork, or always using my hands. And there's a sort of theoretical side I've just touched on about fashion, which is its potency on a sort of socio-political level, but on another level, it's an art form. And when it's done beautifully, such as, brands such as Chanel Couture or Dries Van Noten, it's craft-based. And craftsmanship and artisanal things are things that we forget in this day and age of automation, where we can buy things at the swipe of this, we can get things that are stretchy and comfortable, but actually when you think about craft and artisanship, beautiful fashion is something that comes from highly skilled, difficult things to make and do, and wearing that or owning it or looking at it is a joy. Yeah. I think, and it's so, you can't, even though I would call myself a feminist, you can't deny the allure or the joy that you have when you look at someone or something beautiful. And it's in us. I'm sure Roxanne would have lots to say about that in terms of art as well, how there's something about us as animals almost, that looking at beauty we don't need it to survive, we don't need it to function, but looking at beauty is one of the greatest joys there is, isn't there?
I think of beauty as a joy forever, as Keats famously said. And on that note, I think Shirley's main question is, when can I go shopping?
I'm And I think in England now, I think we're about the most drably dressed people in the world. You can go to the opera in your blue jeans and your T-shirt. There are hardly occasions for us to go and wear anything but. And it seems to only be, I've noticed it because I've lived here, I've lived abroad, I've lived in America, New York. If you go out to dinner, they're much smarter. If you go out in Madrid, if you go out in anywhere, virtually, other than London, it's acceptable to go anywhere looking as if you just got up in the morning, did your daily work, and you could even go in your pajamas. Nobody can care less. And I find that really depressing in this world we're living in. So I really admire you with your enthusiasm, because all the clothes that you actually had on the screen, I've owned. And still have a lot of them.
Oh, God.
And I think one of the greatest of all was Yves Saint Laurent, who you haven't mentioned.
I did at the beginning.
Yes,
the
at the
tuxedo,
very
the
beginning.
smoking, and also the Mondrian dress.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think he's always been in fashion, still is in fashion.
Absolutely.
And you could never go wrong with him.
Quite right.
And then, of course, you haven't mentioned any of the Japanese, the
Well,
Miyakis.
I'm afraid we have
it could go on forever.
You're right.
But
You're
really,
absolutely
what
right.
I wanted to say is how drab, and even the buyers in London, they might be buying French, Italian, Spanish designers, but they seem to buy the things that everybody else has rejected. So on that very happy note, do go shopping.
Go and buy some things you don't need.
So thank you so much for coming. I think that concludes this portion of the talk. Wonderful final thoughts. Just a few things before we let you go. I wanted to say that we have a book for everybody from us, signed personally by Roxanne. So if anyone wants it personalized, please see her. And if you want a book, just come and see me. I'll give you one to bring to Roxanne. The village is ready for you. We've got amazing boutiques, Saint Laurent, Jill Sander, Dior. So I hope you have a good time. And we have the coach for those who are going back to London, leaving at 5 o'clock from where you got on. Other than that, I hope that you had a good time. Thank you so much for coming to speak today. We really, really, really appreciate it. And have a lovely day.
Thank you.